Hi, everybody. I'm Shelby, and this is Danny, and this is Dive Deep.
Yep,
We're back.
we are back.
I guess we were back last week.
We are, but 2 weeks in a row, new record for the
Mhm.
last 6 months.
Longer than that.
Yeah,
We looked last week.
yeah,
and
it was
it's been a
before
while.
Christmas
It
or
was like
Thanksgiving, wasn't it?
it's
Or
like 9 months ago.
yeah, it's been a while. So it's good to be back. Good to be back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right now we're talking about. Well, I guess we're in the series Ever Wonder Why.
Right.
We
Yep.
talked about baptism this week.
Yeah, we did. So what'd you think?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs
Thumbs up to baptism.
thumbs up to baptism. Well, that's good to
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There was a lot to it that I didn't think about.
Okay. So what was some
I
of the
mean-
things you not thought of before?
So, doing it in front of others.
Right. The importance of publicly doing it.
And that's
Mhm.
one of my questions, so don't say too much
Okay.
about that.
All right, I'll stop there.
And I really liked that Martin Luther quote about drowning sin
Mhm.
because I never thought about that before.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I know when you're baptized, say like dead to sin,
or live with
but I had
Christ.
never
Yeah, it kind of gets caught up in the ritual of it, I
Right.
guess, or whatever. Yeah,
just like
Mhm.
that's your baptism.
Right.
You say that when you're
Right.
So
It's
I
just
didn't really
something
think
to
about
say.
the meaning
Yeah.
of it,
Right.
which is bad because if
Right.
you're baptized, you should
Probably know why.
know what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, there
Mhm.
was stuff I didn't think about.
Well, good. Good. I mean, you're really smart, so I'm surprised
I'm
that
so smart.
there was some things you'd never thought of before
Yeah.
because you're just so smart.
It's like I know we've talked about this the last 2 weeks, but that was one of those things. It's like you do it because you do it.
Mhm.
Obviously, you have your reasons, but
Mhm. Mhm.
you don't think too much about details
True. True. Yep.
like communion.
Yeah, I mean, you get into a habit, and when you're in the habit and you've seen it over and over, it's really, I guess, like you get desensitized. It's
Mhm.
like anything in life. If you do it every day or you do something over and over, um, like I think one of the things we've talked about in the office is like with young children, you get in the normal routine of getting them up and getting them to school and getting their baths at night and you do it day after day after day and you don't stop to think that one day, and this is where I'm at in my life, one
Mhm.
day that's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you don't appreciate it when you're in the
Right.
moment because you become so desensitized to it because you're doing it so often.
Yeah.
And baptism can definitely be that way, just like communion or really
Yeah.
anything else. So yeah, it's important to know why we do these things.
Yeah.
So that's why this series I think is a really important one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want my questions?
Sure.
Or do you have more you wanted to talk about?
No, go ahead with your questions, and then we can just kind of go from
Okay.
there. Yep.
All right. So my first question
Mhm.
is, how do you know you're ready for baptism?
Yeah. So this is a question that I have a lot of people ask, especially people with children.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know when my child is ready? Um, I've shared this before. I don't think I've shared it here on your podcast show.
Podcast.
Yeah. So um, the biggest there's really two questions that I ask of anybody, and especially children, and that is first of all, do they understand what sin is?
Mhm.
And I don't mean some kind of like superficial, it's bad stuff or something like that. They need to understand that sin is rebelliousness against God, that it's something that is done against God. It's not just some bad thing. Because a lot of kids, when they're younger years, they understand bad things, but they don't understand how that relates to God.
Right.
So that's one question that I ask. And then simply, okay, if you're a sinner, then what is the remedy to it? What cures that? And they need to know that Jesus Christ, he's the one that cures that.
Right.
If they're able to answer those two questions without coaching or if they're answering them, I mean, it doesn't have to be any kind of deep theological answer, but if they're able to answer those questions relatively well, then they're ready because they have an awareness, and that's really what it comes down to. A person that is ready for baptism is a person that is aware of their sin and aware of their need for Jesus. And so kids are a little trickier. Sometimes kids are ready. I've had kids as young as 5 or 6 years old that are ready. I've had some kids that are 11, 12 years old that are not. So everyone is a little bit different. So that's why it's important for parents to really understand where their child's at. I also think it's good for a pastor or an elder to meet with the child or even with an adult before they're baptized so that you can just be sure that they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
My job, I don't feel like, is to be a gatekeeper. I'm not there to like keep somebody from being baptized, but I'm there to make sure that they know why they're being baptized. And so yeah, that would probably be the best way I would answer that question.
Yeah.
So
I know we
yeah,
had a meeting kind of like that before mine. So.
yeah, right, yeah, and even I do that with children and adults.
Hmm.
Yeah, hmm,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay. My next question was, why is it important to be baptized before others?
So yeah, so that's the public side of it.
Right.
So when we look in the scripture, Jesus was baptized in a public setting. And from what we can gather, when others were baptized, they were baptized in a
Hmm.
public setting. Now, when I say a public setting, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of everybody at church on a Sunday morning,
Okay.
but it needs to be in front of other people in your family, with a pastor or leaders or people in your church present,
Hmm.
because this is something that Jesus says himself. He says, if you confess me before others, I'll confess you before God in heaven.
Hmm.
So that's really, baptism is a form of confession. There's the confession that you make when, usually at our church, we take a confession before a person is baptized. So it's kind of, the two are kind of tied together.
Hmm.
The confession by mouth, but then the action of baptism is all of it is a confession,
Okay.
in a sense. And so doing that publicly is very, very important. I mentioned on Sunday that I've seen too many. There's this movement that's been happening in the last 50 years in the church of like praying Jesus into your heart, or somebody sitting at home watching TV and saying, accepting Jesus into their heart. And I'm not a fan of that. First of all, I don't think it's biblical. There's no
Hmm.
biblical example of that. But secondly, where is the public confession
Hmm.
in that? There isn't any. And so there's no accountability. And that's really what it comes down to. A
Okay.
public confession is accountability. It's saying, okay, I confess Christ, and then others who are seeing this confession
Hmm.
would then sort of be like an accountability partner, or they should be
Okay.
there to help you grow in your faith, and to help you to withstand the trials that come of being a
Hmm.
follower of Jesus. So that's why it's really, really important.
Okay. Well,
Mhm.
because before Sunday, I guess I kind of understood where people were coming from when they said they wanted that to be like a private, personal
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
And I get why they say that.
hmm,
But then after you talked about,
yeah. And I will say this: I'm gonna have to be careful not to like go off on a big time tangent here,
yeah.
but the, I think the idea of this personal faith stuff, is a American thing. It's an
Okay.
American Christianity thing. Um, because here in the United States, unfortunately, and we see this in the public sphere, a lot of people are saying that your faith is a private thing. Keep it out of politics, keep it out of public policy, keep it out
Hmm.
of this, that, and the other, keep it out of the schools. Sometimes you'll even hear families say, we don't talk about politics and religion
Hmm.
because it's going to upset somebody or something, is
Right.
usually why. And that has seeped into our theology to tell us that it's okay to have a public, or a private, I should say, relationship with Jesus where nobody else knows about it.
Hmm.
That is totally unbiblical.
Right.
Like the early church, if they were to see that today, they'd be like, like,
Yeah.
because it was important for it to be a public thing. That is why the early church was persecuted so much,
Hmm.
because they didn't, yes, they had to be careful where they met, and they did meet in private spaces because of their safety, but people's personal relationship was always in a public way with
Hmm.
with their relationship with Jesus in a public way. And so this idea that it's a private thing is just not at all
Hmm.
what what the Bible teaches us.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why baptism. That's why others need to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my last one, it's
Hmm.
kind of general, big topic, but what is next after baptism?
Yeah. So to grow,
Hmm.
to grow in your relationship with Jesus. I know at our church we often suggest people get in a life group. Um, they involve themselves in ministry. They look for things that's going to help them grow closer to Jesus, because
Hmm.
that's really what it's about. Martin Luther talked about, one of the quotes I shared was I can actually I have my notes here today, so I could actually read that for you if I can find it. Um, Martin Luther said this. Where are you at, Martin Luther? Here we go. Here's what he says. He says that the sign of baptism is quickly performed. But what it stands for, the spiritual baptism and drowning of sin, lasts as long as we live and is perfected only in death. Only then are we completely submerged in baptism, and that which baptism signifies finally comes to pass. So what he's saying is that when you are baptized, that's really like the first step of a continual baptizing in a way,
So you're
spiritual
baptized for the rest of your
baptism.
life.
Yes, where you're growing closer and closer to
Mhm.
Jesus, and that's what's next.
Yeah.
Is to grow in your faith, and
So your baptism is just the beginning.
absolutely, and that was one of the points from this Sunday is that it's the first step of obedience. It's not
Mhm.
what saves you, but
Right.
it's something that God calls us to do, and it's that first step.
Mhm.
And then if you don't have that first step, you don't have the eternity that comes after. So
Yeah.
so yeah. hmm
That was all my questions.
That was all your questions. Okay.
I had easy questions this week.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think they were easy. I
Yeah.
don't know.
It wasn't not too bad. Yeah.
Was there anything else
Was
you
there
wanted to
anything
talk
else?
about?
All right. So yeah, one more thing. So we were just talking about the drowning of sin. One thing I didn't dive into, and I'm not going to here, but immersion. So a lot of churches, we were focused more on the why of
Yeah, we've
baptism,
had.
not the how.
Mhm.
But we practice baptism by immersion, and the reason why is that in the New Testament, that's what they
Which
did.
is
Fully
in water.
underwater, fully
Mhm.
underwater, not sprinkling, not pouring. We fully baptize because in the original language, the word baptizo means immersion. It means
Okay.
fully being put underwater. That's what Martin Luther meant when he talked about being baptized, um, drowning your sin. Now, I will say that if I'm not mistaken, I do believe though that Martin Luther, funny enough, believed in sprinkling, which to me makes no sense.
Oh.
When you're talking about drowning your sin, you don't drown anybody by sprinkling anybody, but
Yeah.
but nonetheless, so yeah, it's we practice immersion because that was the model of the New Testament,
Mhm.
and also because we identify with Christ. We talked about that Sunday. We identify with Christ in our baptism.
Mhm.
How do you identify with death? By being buried. You're not buried. Nobody. I've never gone to a funeral where somebody dies and they have the casket and they put it in the hole and they just sprinkle some dirt and say, "All right, we're good."
Right.
It's fully
And I also
buried.
kind of think of that like, okay, that's how Jesus was baptized, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we're not going to do it different.
Right. Right. We should do it the way that he did it and how
Mhm.
they later did it in the early New Testament.
Yeah.
Now I will say this. I mean, there was a time some years back in ministry where somebody was like on their deathbed and you're not able to baptize.
Right.
And see, that's why I would never say baptism is essential. Because if you say baptism is essential, that means somehow we got to unhook that person that's on life support
Right.
and get them underwater. That's not it's not a work.
Mhm.
It's something we do in relation to obedience.
Mhm.
And if somebody's like on their deathbed and Jesus isn't going to say, "Well, sorry, buddy, you didn't,"
Well, and that kind of ties into what we talked about a few weeks ago with heaven and hell stuff about like kids.
Yes, right. Yeah,
Right?
there's original grace and
Yeah.
yeah, right, right. Yeah, it really comes down to your heart. I
So
mean,
there are how do you want to say that? There are asterisks
well, sort of.
to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I mean, think of it like this though too. Think of it from the other perspective. Let's say somebody comes and they want to be baptized,
Mhm.
but they're doing it for the wrong reasons. Like they
Right.
don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe they're a sinner and all. Then is that really a baptism? No, because
Right.
their heart has to be in the right place.
Mhm.
So let's flip that to the deathbed
So the
thing.
baptism should be an outward expression of what's happening in your heart.
Exactly. Wow. Look, that was a great answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. As much as it pained me to say that, but no. That was a good answer. That was a good answer. So I just wanted to bring that up because I didn't really talk about it Sunday. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, and next week, prayer.
Prayer, yeah.
Right?
I'm just about done with that sermon, and let me tell you, I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of taken me in some directions I didn't think I was going to go.
Mhm.
We're going to ask why we even pray to begin with.
Mhm.
I think that's a good question because I think a lot of people are so focused on how do I pray and what do I
Right.
pray about,
Well, I
but
know
not the why.
like while I'm praying before, it's like you already know what I'm gonna say.
That's good. That's a good teaser, Shelby, because that is one of the
Is that-
questions I'm going to
Oh.
dive into. a little bit in the
Yeah.
message. So yeah, good question.
I could be the preacher, right?
Probably.
No.
You're we've been saying for a while that
It's my
you
plan.
got this evil plan to take over. So
Yeah.
yeah, at least we know about it. You're not trying to hide it.
Yeah.
So
I'm expressing it outwardly.
that's right. That's right. You're just being transparent.
Yep. All right. So we'll see you next week when we talk about prayer, and we'll continue Ever Wonder Why.